Good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Mercy Maroki, and we're here all the way through until midday for you with the usual show stacked full of the biggest stories and, of course, those top discussion topics for you.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be reading those out throughout the show, but first, it's time for the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay rise after the Chancellor confirmed he will scrap the year-long pay freeze. Teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel are among those set to benefit. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public pay increases with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 a year after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. The number of police officers facing disciplinary action over sexual misconduct allegations has spiked over the last 3 years. According to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, last year, 70 police staff were accused of abusing their position for sexual purposes, compared to 10 in 2016. Well, between April of 2018 and March of this year, misconduct was proven in 63 individuals, but 38 of those were sacked or able to resign. The Metropolitan Police have apologised to the family of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman for their initial response to reports that they were missing. Well, the sisters were found dead in a North London park in June last year. Daniel Hussein will be sentenced for the double murder this week. Met Commissioner Cressida Dick said the way the force responded to the reports was below the standard we should have achieved. Insulate Britain has declared the M25 a site of non-violent civil resistance starting from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Well, that comes after a new nationwide injunction was granted against the environment group following a day of further demonstrations yesterday. The climate activist group had paused demonstrations for 10 days but resumed its roadblock campaign. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Prince Andrew denies the allegations against him. Sir David Attenborough has called on world leaders to act now or it will be too late for the planet. The 95-year-old issued the warning ahead of the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. Sir David said the possibilities of COP26 gave him some hope, but every month that passes, climate change becomes more and more incontrovertible. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll have more for you at 10 o'clock.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Maroki, and Patrick Christys. We've got a show full of all of today's biggest stories and lots of discussions on the issues you care about. So here's what's on the menu today.
Yes, we'll be looking ahead to the budget tomorrow, from NHS funding to cash for schools, and finding out what the Chancellor's plans might mean for your money.
Yes, and we'll also be looking into One Mother's campaign to save lives by installing emergency first aid kits across city centres in response to a rise in knife crime, and that's an issue I'll be tackling in my monologue at 10.
Yes, also on the programme, should NHS workers be sacked if they refuse to get jabbed? We'll talk about this and show you what members of the public had to say when I put it to them yesterday.
Yes, we have all that coming up and much more as well across the programme, so get in touch with your views as usual on gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on the unjabbed being shunned.
Yes, I think we are heading towards a situation, essentially, where the unjabbed will become shunned from society. I think this is a really, really damaging situation, and I don't want to actually be there. I wonder where you stand on this, to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be returning to it throughout the show, and I would like your views, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But here's where we are. Now, I think we're going to head towards a situation where the unvaccinated will become a global underclass. In more and more nations around the world, the conversation and indeed policy has shifted from please get the vaccine, you can book your vaccine appointment here, to if you don't get the vaccine, you will lose your job and personal freedoms. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's nobody's business whether or not I've been jabbed or how many jabs I've had. I have actually spoken about it before, so I'm sure people can find out if they really want to. But it's also none of my business whether or not you've been jabbed. But governments around the world, ironically often supposedly the most liberal governments, do want to make it everybody's business whether or not you've been jabbed. Let's have a look at New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, one of the most liberal leaders in the world, has openly said that she's enforcing a two-tier society where the unvaccinated won't be able to live their normal lives. Justin Trudeau in Canada, the only uber-liberal I know to have blacked up on several occasions. In fact, he's worn inappropriate fancy dress more than a loud, darts-loving northerner. Anyway, he's decided to place unvaccinated federal employees on unpaid leave and require COVID-19 shots for air, train and ship passengers, and he's rolled out one of the world's strictest vaccine passport systems. Joe Biden in the United States has announced a jabs for jobs policy for anyone wanting to work in federal government. But, and this is where I fear we're going with it, this then paved the way for independent businesses to enforce the same policy. So in August, United Airlines announced vaccine mandates for its 67,000 employees. And by the end of September, the company said 99% had been jabbed. Some 600 were fired, however. Tyson Foods as well also demanded its 120,000 employees got jabbed. Now, Austria, to be fair, not exactly a country previously known for its staunch liberalism, is threatening to put the unvaccinated under house arrest. Now, I just fear that there's a chance that this may come our way. It's already mandatory for care home staff to take the vaccine, and Sajid Javid is considering making it mandatory for all NHS staff to take the jab. As things stand, 106,351 NHS staff have not had the jab. That's 7% apparently. So these are people who've obviously made a conscious decision not to get the jab. Well, if the NHS really is as understaffed and overused as it claims to be, can we afford to lose 7% of them? I want to make one thing very clear. I'm certainly not against the vaccine. And I think anyone who has decided not to get it and expects to lead a normal life going forward should actually be very grateful that it exists and that so many other people have taken it, because ultimately that's their key to freedom. But what I am against is state control over anyone's bodily autonomy. I am against creating a cult where only one discussion or opinion can be had about the vaccine. I am against creating a situation where we can't have a rational discussion about exactly how safe the vaccine is. I don't want a situation where there is the potential for medical or scientific evidence to be ignored because it doesn't suit a government narrative. I am against people being threatened with the loss of their livelihoods if they don't comply, and I am very concerned that parents who decide they don't want their child to be jabbed for whatever reason may be looked at like they're child abusers. Look, does the skinny, marathon-running, healthy-eating, clean-living, unvaccinated person really need to get the vaccine to protect the obese, fast-food-loving, hard-drinking, chain-smoking vaccinated person? In my opinion, that individual should do more to look after their own health and stop expecting other people to lose their bodily autonomy in order to help them out.
I think the conversation about vaccine hesitancy is really important, and I think it's important to find out why people are reluctant to get the vaccine. The rates are currently very high, and we should be grateful for that. Currently 71%, for example, in Scotland and Wales, percentage of the population fully vaccinated. I think it's interesting that it's young people who are most hesitant. It's not surprising, who are most hesitant about getting the virus. Apparently nearly a fifth of 16 to 29s are hesitant, compared to 1% of over 18, which indicates to me that actually it's young people who perhaps don't think that they personally need to have the vaccine. Maybe we should be talking about natural immunity more as well, and the immunity that people who have had COVID have as well. But it's clearly a lot of young people are going to be disproportionately affected by anything that is sort of forced on them in terms of mandatory vaccination.
I think, again, just want to make it clear, I'm certainly not against the vaccine at all. I hope that's been pretty obvious. But it's the issue that I have about the potential for people to essentially be treated like second-class citizens if, for whatever reason, they don't have it. However, a lot of you have got in touch. There's obviously a very split discussion. There's no excuse not to have the vaccine. Kids who aren't vaccinated from measles shouldn't be in schools. That's from Andy. It's a great point there, Andy. And this is Susan again, getting in touch. Whilst I agree with you mostly, all that I would say is that I wouldn't like my family to be treated in hospital without someone having been vaccinated. I can completely get that.
I think for me, social care, yes, completely agree. Care homes, obviously, very vulnerable people. And NHS, I very much see a strong case. But as you say, are we really going to kick out 7% of the NHS staff when exactly? So I don't, even if he wanted to, that's clearly not going to happen. Sajid Javid is not going to do that. So let us know what you think, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But coming up, Wednesday's budget will confirm an end to the controversial public sector pay freeze. We'll be finding out what this means for you and whether it means more tax rises are just around the corner. Stay with us. Now, Wednesday's budget will confirm an end to the controversial public sector pay freeze. The pay freeze was introduced by Chancellor Rishi Sunak in November to tackle what he called an economic emergency in light of the second wave of the pandemic. The move was met with much criticism after 2.6 million teachers, police and civil servants were affected. However, Sunak has said that now that the economy is getting back on track, pay freeze will come to an end for 5 million public sector workers.
Yes, indeed. Well, Matthew Lesh from the Adam Smith Institute, which is a leading think tank that promotes free market policies, is with us now. Thank you very much for joining us. So, what will the end of the public sector pay freeze actually mean for people then, Matthew?
Well, look, nothing in the immediate terms. I think the way it's going to work is it's going to allow various bodies to approve of pay increases for public sector workers. The extent of that and how much that's going to cost is unknown. It does, though, open the government up to some quite substantial financial liabilities. Of course, the government doesn't have its own money, it has our money. So that is either going to mean more debt or higher taxes in future to fund those public sector salaries. And on top of that, the fact that there could be some inflationary pressures that come out of that as well. Combine that with the minimum wage announcement, which is going to increase the minimum wage, is going to push up a lot of costs onto businesses. We're looking at a situation where yes, it may be slightly deceptive to say that wages are actually going up when the cost of living is going up at the same time.
And for, you know, an individual at the moment who does work in the public sector, do you think they'll be looking, do you think what they'll get from this budget with the minimum wage increases, for example, sector pay freeze, is that going to immediately come to them? I mean, when can they expect to actually feel welfare?
Well, look, I don't think that many people in the public sector are actually specifically on the minimum wage. So the minimum wage increase probably isn't going to impact them. And there aren't actually going to be public sector pay increases for some time. I wouldn't think, because you actually need to go through the assessment process and negotiations. What's overall disappointing, though, is that the government's not thinking a little bit more ambitiously when it comes to the public sector and pay. I mean, there are no doubt plenty of high quality public sector workers who should be rewarded for their efforts. But instead, what we have is a very socialistic system, a very centralized system where basically everyone moves up in pay scales together, rather than how it tends to work in the private sector, which is your pay goes up as you get more productive, as you contribute more. So a more individualized system for pay might be more appropriate, rather than just allowing everyone's salaries to go up arbitrarily at the same time, whether or not they put in the effort this year or whether or not they haven't.
Does it actually make a difference as well that we're hearing about minimum wage going up? I mean, everything else seems to be going up as well, in real terms. Is it actually going to affect people?
Well, I think it might have some effect for those people who maintain their jobs. On the other hand, though, we do know the minimum wage increases do come with costs. Businesses tend to provide fewer hours. They tend to automate because just the cost of labour goes up. And then there's also throughput costs in terms of a lot of the goods that are consumed by minimum wage workers are the goods they themselves produce, and therefore, although they might see their wage increase, if the cost of goods is going up at the same time, they're not actually going to have much of an increase in their quality of life. So, although it's great from the government's perspective to say, oh, this minimum wage increase 6%, that's going to have a real large impact on people's lives. If the cost of living is going up at the same time, or businesses can't afford to employ them for as many hours, they're actually not going to be much better off. In fact, some studies indicate they might be worse off as a result of a minimum wage increase, particularly one of a quite substantial size that we're seeing.
Talking about cost, of course, all of this will come at a cost to the taxpayer, won't it? And of course to businesses as well, if they have to give people less hours, etc. Will we see, do you think, an increase in taxes as well to cover the cost of all these measures?
Of course, we're already seeing increasing taxes, already got an increase in national insurance of quite a substantial amount for workers in the mid-levels. We're already seeing increases planned for corporate tax rates over the coming years that we know are going to have a quite substantial negative impact with respect to investment, entrepreneurialism. Will there be more tax increases? I'd be interested to see how the Chancellor intends to balance the book. So far, we've had a lot of announcements about spending commitments. We've got billions being spent here and there, something like 22 billion was announced as of yesterday in spending commitments. Some of it new, some of it re-announcing previous commitments. But of course, we have to remember that every single pence, every single pound has to be paid for somehow. Ideally, it will come because our economy will be bigger, because we'll be a stronger position economically, which will mean more government revenue, which means more to go around. But if there isn't more to go around and the government makes all these spending commitments at the same time, we're either going to rocket up the debt, which means future taxation, or we're going to have to increase taxes in the shorter run. So I think that's something to be very aware of. Although it's nice to spend money, it's not so nice for the government to have to raise it. And we haven't seen much announcement with respect to actually what the government's fiscal position is. I suppose that's the detail we're going to see today or tomorrow when the actual budget comes out.
And finally, just before you go, I know the Adam Smith Institute has said that global minimum tax could cost Britain billions. You're right, that's the £7 billion annual tax revenue could undermine could be undermined and even lost because of global minimum tax. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the UK, amongst over 130 other countries, is agreed to negotiate some new tax treaties. This is really being spearheaded by Joe Biden and the OECD, who want a so-called better level playing field when it comes to corporate taxes. This is not in the UK's interest, according to our analysis. The UK tracks business with its relatively low corporate tax rates, and we could lose some of that as a result, and that could result in up to £7 billion in lost revenue. You've also got other issues. Some of the key UK government policies, I'm talking about things like the super deduction, free ports, aren't actually compatible with the way the global minimum tax is being designed. It also could serve to attack a lot of the kind of financial sector that the UK really specialises in. So although Rishi Sunak's under a lot of pressure, that there's at the G20 on the weekend, Biden wants everyone to sign up to this deal, I think we have to be very careful about some of the details behind it, as well as just the broader principle here: who should set our taxation? The UK just left the European Union. We just said we want to be responsible for our own policy setting, and now we're immediately sacrificing one of our key liberties. Not too long ago, in a revolution, the Americans were very angry about Britain setting tax powers, and I believe there was a little Boston Tea Party and a little bit of a revolution that came out of the fact that a foreign power was setting US tax powers. I don't know why the UK would be succumbing to somebody else having the power to decide what taxes Britain can charge on her citizens.
Indeed. Well, Matthew Lesh, thank you for joining us this morning and explaining all of that for us. Matthew Lesh there from the Adam Smith Institute.
Absolutely. Now, just going to give you a quick hit of some of your views because they've been coming in like thick and fast, it's fair to say. And we're going to be returning to this issue throughout the show. One of the big issues is about vaccine uptake, whether or not NHS staff should be essentially sacked if they don't take the jab. And it's gbviews at gbnews.uk. I had a bit of a chat about this right at the start of the show, and it's massively kicked off on both sides. We've got Richard on one of them. Patrick, you are wrong again. There are certain things in life you just have to adhere to. In this case, it's the jab. All NHS professionals should get it. I just want to make clear, I wasn't passing comment on the fact that I don't think that NHS professionals shouldn't take the jab or they should take the jab whatsoever. We're having a conversation about it, aren't we? And it's not me making these rules, is it? It's our health minister who may or may not be about to say that if you don't get it, then you get booted out. So that's why we're having the conversation about it. Julie's been in touch. The argument that it's a social responsibility to protect others is predated on a false notion that one person's vaccination protects others. And also, I think there's been a fantastic comment here from Kim, and this is a great comment. If people don't get the jab, should they still get the same level of NHS treatment? Look, one way or the other, keep these views coming in because it's a topic that isn't going away, and we do need to have a conversation about it. GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Yes, indeed. Now, moving on, an Insulate Britain protester has admitted that he regrets gluing his face to the road in the City of London yesterday morning, saying it wasn't one of my better moves, which I think is the biggest understatement ever. Matthew Tully, who runs South Yorkshire-based company Solid Carbon Storage, has admitted he is a fan of Insulate Britain on the company's YouTube channel, became one of the 52 people arrested during the demonstration yesterday. We're just showing you those scenes there of the gentleman gluing his face. And he was speaking with his glued face glued to the road on Monday, and he told The Telegraph, "It was to make a statement that things are fairly critical, and so I was wanting to have an extreme action to reflect the extreme nature of the emergency that we're facing." So, not very bright.
Well,
I think that might be a reflection.
we all make mistakes.
I think that's a reflection of some of their IQs, really.
We had to try and cut his own hair with some scissors and stuff, and it wasn't a great day out for the chap. Anyway, animal rights activists have scaled the DEFRA and Home Office building in London today as they demanded government support for a plant-based food system at COP26. Well, the activists from Animal Rebellion climbed up the structure on Marsham Street in Westminster, which houses both departments, from about 6 a.m. this morning. Now, the group, which is affiliated to Extinction Rebellion, organised the protest ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, which starts this Sunday.
Yes.
Apparently, we're going to be talking to a couple of them just after 10 o'clock. Apparently, we must have scaled the building ourselves. We've sent some intrepid reporters to go and winch themselves to DEFRA.
Again, the price we pay to live in a civil society, isn't it? You get people doing some interesting activism.
Well, they believe
bits of activism
in their cause, don't they?
Yes, they do. Well, keep all your thoughts coming into us on email, gbviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more on today's top stories and plenty of your views after the break.
Hello, good morning. Contrasts across the UK this morning. A bright start in the east, albeit on the chilly side. A cloudier start elsewhere, and rain will steadily move across northern parts of the country as this weather front moves in. This is a warm front, and it's going to open a door to this slice of mild, moist and very windy Atlantic air, and that's really going to dominate proceedings through the next few days in many places. So the rainfall marching across the country, a spell of rain for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, northwest Wales for a time. 1 or 2 spots of rain further south as the cloud thickens on its way across the UK. But on the whole, by the afternoon, actually many places are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some holes appearing in the cloud and the wind will pick up, but it's coming from a mild direction. So 16 or 17 in the south, 14 to 16 further north. And that wind particularly gusty around hills or just to the east of the hills across northern England, southern Scotland, and gales developing across northern and western coasts of Scotland. The wet weather, though, in the northwest pushes its way south into the rest of Scotland overnight, and then by dawn on Wednesday, it's into Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, northwest England. Otherwise, it's a very mild start tomorrow morning for much of England and Wales. 15s as we begin things. A lot of cloud around, that strong breeze continues. But really the focus for the wet weather is in this small area of northwest Wales, northwest England, southwest Scotland. Risk of localised flooding in some places, particularly Cumbria. Yellow rain warnings in force. Brighter to the north, but a little cooler. A few showers in the northwest of Scotland. And also brighter to the south. 18 Celsius possible across parts of southeast England and East Anglia. But the rain does move south through Thursday and Friday. Some wet weather, particularly for southwest England and South Wales. And it stays mild across the board.
Yes, good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. Now, we are here all the way through until midday with a show full of all of today's biggest topics and those biggest talking points as well, so get in touch.
Yes, make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on GB's. At gbnews.uk, we'll be reading those throughout the show, but first, let's give you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 10 o'clock. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay rise after the Chancellor confirmed he will scrap the year-long pay freeze. The change is part of tomorrow's budget and will impact teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public sector pay increases with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 a year after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. Mr Sunak said on Monday that the economy was firmly back on track and that it was right that frontline workers would see their wages rise.
Yeah, why do I feel depressed about all of this? You know, when I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, sadly, 30 years ago, the national debt was 30% of the gross domestic product of this country in any given year. Now it's well over 100%. The amount of money that has been spent on this pandemic is over £400 billion, an almost impossible figure for most people, including indeed myself, to contemplate. And yet we are now apparently going to have another budget where more billions are being given to the NHS.
The Independent Office for Police Conduct say the number of police officers they've probed for allegations of sexual misconduct has spiked over the last 3 years. Last year, they investigated 70 police staff accused of abusing their position for sexual purposes. In 2016, they investigated 10. Between April 2018 and March this year, the IOPC proved the misconduct of 63 individuals, 38 of whom were either sacked or resigned.
I think misconduct can come in many forms, and it reflects the culture sometimes, and it's really important that there is a culture in policing that has a zero tolerance of any form of behaviour that is misogynist, is sexist, is homophobic. There is just no place for that in modern policing. We want to see forces sending out that message. We want to see individual officers calling out their fellow officers, which we do see, but we'd like to see more of that. And we'd like to see forces really emphasising to officers that this behaviour is wrong and that there are consequences, as we're seeing today when you're caught.
The Metropolitan Police has apologised to the family of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman for their initial response to reports that they were missing. The sisters were found dead in North London in a park in June last year. Daniel Hussein will be sentenced for the double murder this week. Met Commissioner Cressida Dick said the way the force responded to the reports was below the standard we should have achieved and compounded the distress felt by their loved ones. New research says women serving in the UK military are at considerable risk of emotional bullying, sexual harassment and physical assault. A study published in the Military Health Journal showed that younger female officers are most likely to be subject to these behaviours. The study says all of these forms of harassment also leave women at risk of post-traumatic stress disorder. There are over 16,500 women serving in the UK military. They make up 11% of personnel. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Virginia Giuffre is seeking unspecified damages from the 61-year-old. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations made against him, and his lawyer has dismissed the accusations as baseless. Insulate Britain has declared the M25 a site of non-violent civil resistance, starting from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. It comes after a new nationwide injunction was granted against the eco group following a day of further demonstrations. The climate activist group had paused demonstrations for 10 days, but resumed its roadblock campaign yesterday. The Department for Transport said the High Court had granted the interim injunction against members of the group who caused disruption on any part of the strategic road network in England. Environmental campaigners have scaled a government building in Westminster, urging COP26 to invest in a plant-based future. 4 activists from Animal Rebellion, it's an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, used ropes and harnesses to climb the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. The group is demanding an end to subsidies for meat and dairy farming in a protest against climate change. Well, they began the protest at 6 a.m. today. They say they plan to stay there indefinitely. Sir David Attenborough has called on world leaders to act now or it will be too late for the planet. The 95-year-old issued the warning ahead of the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow. Sir David said the possibilities of COP26 gave him some hope, but every month that passes, climate change becomes more and more inconvertible. You're right up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you in half an hour. Right now, it's back to the point.
Good morning again. You're watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussion on the issues you care about. So here's what's on the menu.
Yes, well, it's good news for public sector workers who can expect a pay rise next year after the Chancellor confirmed their pay freeze is being lifted. We'll give you more on that shortly.
Yes, and East Midlands Airport is busier than ever. We'll be speaking to our East Midlands reporter live to get the latest on why people are travelling much more.
Yes, and are playgrounds too safe? That's right, you heard. Some researchers suggested that shielding our children from risk increases their chances of poor mental health. So we have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views, and many of you have been, by the way. Keep it coming, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy's got some views of her own.
Eight men have been arrested after 2 teenage boys were stabbed to death in Essex over the weekend. These are just the latest tragic deaths in a long list of stabbings across the country. And when it comes to knife crime, I find myself sounding like a broken record. Yet again, a young person has been mercilessly slain at the hands of someone wielding a blade. And yet again, politicians are silent on the issue. Knife crime has been rising year on year in England and Wales since 2013, with the exception of last year. It took a global pandemic and a total shutdown of the country to curb yet another annual rise in knife crime last year. And it's not just actual stabbings that have gone up. People are clearly feeling bolder in carrying and using knives. Police figures show that over the last decades, threats to kill using a knife have gone up 252%. Rapes where a knife was involved, up 128%. Attempted murder using a knife, up 109%. And this is not just a London issue. The highest rate of knife offences per head can be found in the West Midlands, and Surrey has seen a 632% increase over the last decade. And all this begs the question, why on earth do we not have a national knife crime strategy? Our approach to knife crime in this country is so futile and incoherent that one police force set up a knife bin outside their station so that those carrying knives can safely discard them without getting into trouble, which is fine so far, except the hole to drop the knives in was so big that you could literally fit your hand inside and take the knives back out, which is exactly what one man was able to do. Needless to say, this idea was swiftly scrapped, which is exactly why we need a national knife crime strategy, complete with a national knife crime unit, a dedicated czar, backed up by funding with targets so police forces and ministers can be held accountable. The Chancellor has repeatedly said during the pandemic that the government would do whatever it takes to support the economy, that it would behave like a wartime government to tackle the pandemic. Well, we are in another kind of war, a war against knife crime, and we're losing it. If only the government would do whatever it takes on the knife crime pandemic.
Yes, I mean, I think nothing sums up the government's approach, or maybe the Met Police's approach to the knife crime epidemic than having a knife amnesty box where you can nick knives out of.
Yes, exactly. That happened, I think it was just a few days ago. And it's, London has a knife crime strategy, for example. I think they published it in 2017. It hasn't even been updated. They haven't bothered to update it for a few years. Police forces have their own knife crime strategies, but I just don't understand why we don't have a national knife crime strategy, because clearly this is an epidemic and there is so much knife crime that goes on and so many young people die as a result. And if young people were dying because of anything else, I mean, if they were dying because of COVID, for example, we'd be doing all we could to make sure that wasn't happening. So the inaction never fails to amaze me.
Well, actually, it's funny you should say that, because, yes, I do tend to agree, but I'm going to be discussing a bit later on. We've got a hold of some figures, actually, about a children's mental health crisis that's taking place, a young person's mental health crisis, actually. Some of them are students, it's not all children, and again, some serious question marks. We talk about a pandemic, don't we? We talk about whether it's to do with the coronavirus. Well, you just said there's a knife crime pandemic on. There is. Yep. There's a mental health one on now as well. And, yeah, we only seem to be tackling one of them, don't we?
Yes, indeed. Well, let us know your thoughts, GBViews, at gbnews.uk. But moving on, animal rebellion protesters scaled up the side of the Home Office building in Westminster this morning to send a message to world leaders attending climate conference COP26 next week. The message, which took 2.5 hours of climbing and fiddling with a large orange banner to announce, calls on world leaders to, quote, invest in a plant-based future. Animal Rebellion is an offshoot group of the climate change organisation Extinction Rebellion.
Yes, well, we are joined, ladies and gentlemen, now by two of the protesters, I believe. And I understand that James is on the side of the building and Nathan is on the ground below, possibly with a big net. I'm not sure. Can we go to them now? Yes, OK, fantastic stuff. All right, then, James, I've got to go to you first. I take it you're safe where you are now? We're not going to witness something horrific live on air?
Now we're safe. We got hard hats, we got loads of safety climbing gear. We're all experienced climbers in buddy systems, so this is a really safe and really planned and careful action. So yeah, no one's going to get hurt today.
All right.
Yeah, no worries.
OK, well, with that out of the way then, why are you being such a public nuisance?
I think we're not being a public nuisance. In the UK, government is being a public nuisance by spending £1.5 billion of taxpayer money on subsidies for the meat and dairy industry. That's an industry that is ultimately killing the planet and killing billions of animals. In the meantime, it's spending £150 million, that's 10% of that, on planting trees and similarly on alternative proteins. So it goes to show like the government's priorities in terms of propping up unsustainable and unprofitable industries over what's ultimately better for the public and for the planet.
And Nathan, let me turn to you. I'm clearly somebody who you would need to convince, for example, to turn to veganism. I'm a meat eater. I love meat. So it's people like me, surely, that you need to be convincing of your cause. How do you do that? Because I'm not sure being what some might say is a public nuisance is going to achieve that.
All right, so essentially, I just want to address that we're actually a movement that is geared towards system change, not individual change. We are demanding that our governments and larger corporations make a stand and use their power and resources to make the change to a just and sustainable plant-based food system. That is the only way we are going to have a sustainable future on this planet that is just for humans, for the planet, and for animals. So essentially what we're demanding is a system change, and that our government invests in plant-based alternatives rather than the obscene amount of money it spends on animal agriculture subsidies in order to provide plant-based alternatives.
That's an authoritarian approach, though, isn't it? Instead of trying to convince individuals to change their ways, you want government to dictate to them what they can and can't eat.
So essentially, we are demanding that our government makes this change because of the irrefutable scientific evidence that shows animal agriculture is responsible for around a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon. And it is proven again, irrefutably, that by transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system, we will be securing the future on this planet for humans, animals, and the environment.
And James, coming back to you, I mean, what are your plans for the rest of the day? How long are you going to stay up there? How long are you going to stay up there? I mean, is it till the demands are met? Because if it is, I think you might be waiting a long time.
Yeah, well, I know we've been waiting for a change on climate change in the UK for decades now, and it's still not coming fast enough. So we're prepared to stay here. We've actually got some hammocks, and I think we're planning on getting comfortable until either our demands are met or we at least have a meaningful conversation with someone from DEFRA who can discuss how they're going to transition their subsidies away from these destructive industries to something a bit more sustainable, a bit more fair, ultimately our only solution going forward, which is plant-based alternatives over meat and dairy. So basically, we'll see, as long as it takes, is the answer to that, in short.
Isn't there a certain irony that if you lived in the kind of country that you want to create, which appears, as we've already established there, to be very authoritarian and quite dictatorial, they would have just cut you down by now, wouldn't they?
By no means. I definitely don't want to live in an authoritarian regime. I just want...
Because you want the government to get involved. You want the government to tell us what we can and can't eat. That's a dictatorship.
Well, the government's already doing that. It's giving £1.5 billion of subsidies to make animal foods unfairly cheap, unfairly convenient, and still more destructive. So we're saying, why don't we remove those? Essentially, it's propping up an industry that's meant to die. So why are we doing that? If you believe in taxpayers' money being spent on things that don't ruin the planet and are just completely unnecessary, why don't we move away from that? £1.5 billion of totally unnecessary spending.
And Nathan, final word to you. How far are your organisation willing to go? Could we see protests on the roads, for example, like Insulate Britain?
Well, first of all, Insulate Britain are a completely distinct group from us. They have their means and goals, and we have ours. We are strictly a non-violent direct action group. We will remain peaceful, but if that means taking direct action, then so be it. And we are willing to carry on going. We are very motivated, and we will carry on going until we see this transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system.
Well, James and Nathan, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your time.
Yes. Wow.
Thank you.
Interesting. I was going to say good luck, but I don't think we can get that far, can we? But anyway, yes, right. Well, as you can imagine, lots of you reacting to those two individuals there. Don't these two people realise that lettuce is cheaper to produce and buy than a fillet steak? Well, this reaction is coming in as I'm...
Do they mean us two idiots by any chance?
I think so. I think you're talking about us two idiots, weren't you, and not them? Yeah. I don't know if that particular individual also realises how lettuce compares to a fillet steak, and there's no competition. There's no competition. People genuinely concerned that with all of our protests now, that the country's going to grind to a halt. Kim's very anxious about all of that.
Yeah. I mean, they seem more reasonable, I think, than some of the... people from Insulate Britain, for example. And, you know, they do make some fair points, I suppose. But nobody likes to be disrupted. And to be fair, they're not disrupting the public, it seems, at the moment. They are just, I think, trying to get somebody from the Department for Food and Environment and Rural Affairs to come and speak to them. So less disruptive, I think, to the public.
I do find it very hard to get around the idea that they've openly just said there on the news that instead of trying to convince individuals to be vegan or, well, that really, isn't it? They actually want the government to enforce that. But they're like, where does that end? And it is quite a totalitarian outlook.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the government has to do something, in a sense. I don't think they're calling on the government to mandate veganism necessarily. I think they're saying the government should redirect their investment to plant-based foods, which, as I say, you know, I think it's about convincing people like me, who I am very partial to a fillet steak. So sadly, I'm not sure that will convince me.
No, absolutely. Well, look, coming up, should NHS staff be forced to get a COVID jab? This is a massive topic for us today. It's kicked off in our inbox about this. We've gone out and spoken to the nation, and we're going to be doing a head-to-head on it as well. I have been out and been asking you what you think. Stay tuned, but first, it's time for the weather.
Hello, good morning. Contrasts across the UK this morning. A bright start in the east, albeit on the chilly side. A cloudier start elsewhere, and rain will steadily move across northern parts of the country as this weather front moves in. This is a warm front, and it's going to open a door to this slice of mild, moist and very windy Atlantic air, and that's really going to dominate proceedings through the next few days in many places. So the rainfall marching across the country, a spell of rain for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, northwest Wales for a time. 1 or 2 spots of rain further south as the cloud thickens on its way across the UK. But on the whole, by the afternoon, actually many places are turning drier and brighter. There'll be some holes appearing in the cloud, and the wind will pick up, but it's coming from a mild direction. So 16 or 17 in the south, 14 to 16 further north. And that wind particularly gusty around hills or just to the east of the hills across northern England, southern Scotland, and gales developing across northern and western coasts of Scotland. The wet weather, though, in the northwest pushes its way south into the rest of Scotland overnight, and then by dawn on Wednesday, it's into Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland, northwest England. Otherwise, it's a very mild start tomorrow morning for much of England and Wales, 15s as we begin things. A lot of cloud around, that strong breeze continues. But really the focus for the wet weather is in this small area of northwest Wales, northwest England, southwest Scotland. Risk of localised flooding in some places, particularly Cumbria. Yellow rain warnings in force. Brighter to the north, but a little cooler. A few showers in the northwest of Scotland. And also brighter to the south. 18 Celsius possible across parts of southeast England and East Anglia. But the rain does move south through Thursday and Friday. Some wet weather, particularly for southwest England and South Wales. And it stays mild across the board.
Hello everybody, Patrick Christie's here, out and about for GB News, and what I'm going to be asking today is whether or not NHS staff should lose their jobs if they don't get the coronavirus vaccine. It raises some really interesting questions about civil liberties, personal freedom, freedom of choice, but also, of course, frankly, public safety. Where are you on this? Well, let's find out. There's a policy that might come in now, which is that if you work for the NHS and you decide not to get a vaccine, they might sack you.
That's really bad. I don't think that's fair at all. I think it should be personal choice.
I think to set an example would be good for everyone in the NHS to get a vaccine. But that's a bit extreme to get, sacked for it. That's not right.
If NHS staff don't get a COVID vaccine, do you think they should lose their job?
That's a bit sad then. No, not really, because when you sign up to a job, that's not really in the job description, any sort of medical thing, anything like that. I think the only time I've ever heard that if you're in the military and they ask you to do vaccinations, but you're aware of that beforehand.
Yeah.
But with NHS, they've kind of taken years to set up their career to get there. It's a bit peak now, after all they've done to help us, to then say, oh, by the way, we're not going to give you a job.
We all have choices to make in life, don't we? But if it's saving lives, if the job that you're in, then yes, of course.
People may have a valid reason for not wanting to take the jab. I would take it, but it seems unfair to take someone's livelihood away because of their point of view on that.
There was always the argument for personal choice, but I think in this situation, I don't think it's as clear-cut as that.
Because they might affect someone else's life.
Yes, that's right, and because they are caring for others as well. It just seems like the risk is greater to them and for them to pass it on.
Yeah, I thought that was a topic I really desperately have wanted to for quite a while, actually, get the public's views on, and kind of had the opportunity to use it as a bit of a springboard, because that's where we are. As unjabbed said, he's entertaining the idea anyway of making it a mandatory vaccine for anyone who works in the NHS. And there's obviously two sides to this, aren't there? I can completely get the idea that if one of my family members was in the NHS and contracted coronavirus from an unvaccinated nurse and then died, then I'd be absolutely fuming. However, at the same time, I don't really feel morally comfortable with making someone get a vaccine.
Yeah, I do think, I take that point, but I do think with a national health service and with social care settings as well for older people, I think there is a much stronger, perhaps, moral case for making sure people are double jabbed, less so than if people want to go to football matches or whatever. But I think all this for me comes down to what is the actual benefit to, in terms of transmission, how much does it reduce transmission? And clearly you can still get it, you can still pass it on. There has been data to show it does, reduce the likelihood of transmission to some extent. So I think that's the key question, really, isn't it?
And there's another couple of points as well, which is that in America we saw no jabs, no jobs when it came to federal government. Now, what a lot of big corporations decided to do was mirror that. So you had American Airlines, for example. I think it's Tyson Foods is another massive, massive employer who rolled it out over there. So is there the concern that if the NHS do it here, and the care home sector obviously already have done it here, that, I don't know, completely hypothetically here, Tesco's might do it. There's no indication that Tesco's will, but that could happen, could it not? And then on top of that as well, I can't help but wonder, this is something that's not being spoken about, and it's come up right now, in fact, in my inbox from Mandy, and it came up a lot from people on the streets, which is the NHS and the people in it, especially the ones on the front line, did a lot during the course of the pandemic, didn't they, to help us, and there were lives saved. And now, is it unfair on those people to say to them, all right, if you don't get a jab, then you don't have a job? And look, it's a really fascinating discussion, this. There's loads of different views on it. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Yes, now on to the next story with another surge in knife crime and authorities warning of a fresh wave of terror attacks. A Birmingham mother whose own son was killed in a stabbing has told GB News bleed control kits are urgently needed across the country. Lynn Baird has fought a one-woman campaign to have the packs of heavy-duty bandages and tourniquets installed at key locations in towns and cities.
Yes, so far 2,000 kits have been distributed and have already been instrumental in saving the lives of two people stabbed recently in Birmingham and London. Well, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, Mark White, reports from Birmingham now.
Daniel went out for a night. There was some kind of altercation in the pub. It was nothing to do with him at all, and he was stabbed, and I didn't see him again.
In the 4 years since her son was stabbed and killed, Lynn Baird has fought a relentless campaign to do something positive in Daniel's memory. She is a remarkable woman who came up with the simple but highly effective idea for these specialist bleed control kits to help stem catastrophic blood loss long enough for expert help to arrive.
It's really got everything you would need. This tourniquet, obviously, I mean, for shutting off the extremities if you've got a big, serious arterial bleed.
Yep, military grade. Trauma bandage, that's for severe bleeding, you know, and practically foolproof to use as well.
Lynn believes that a simple bleed kit could have saved her own son.
There was no time. If there had been one of these kits in the pub and it had been used, we might have a different story now.
You're convinced of that?
Oh, yeah. That's what made me carry on with this campaign.
With no end in sight to the epidemic of violent crime in many of our towns and cities, bleed control kits are now being rolled out more widely. More than 2,000 so far, with demand growing by the day. The Midlands Air Ambulance attend an average of 4 serious stabbings and shootings a week, and many more incidents where catastrophic blood loss is a key concern. Without a doubt, the Midlands Air Ambulance offers the very best critical care outside of the hospital environment, and they can get a patient to hospital in a fraction of a time it takes a land ambulance to do that. But there's no point in them even attending if a patient bleeds out before they arrive. More than 60% of call-outs for the air ambulance are trauma-related, where severe blood loss is common.
If someone has a cardiac arrest in the street, a defibrillator gets there and can make the difference in 30 seconds. Yet if somebody has a catastrophic bleed, where do you get the equipment that's going to save that life? So things like the bleed control kits, like the citizen aid advice that's available, and like the first aid training that's out there, those things together will save lives, and the interventions available in this kit will absolutely stop a catastrophic hemorrhage in the right place in the right time.
The murder of Sir David Amos has highlighted the continuing threat from terrorism, with authorities warning of the possibility of a fresh wave of attacks. Senior trauma specialists say bleed control kits, coupled with increased first aid training programmes, can help arm the public to better respond and help those caught up in an attack, where it can often be some time before medical help can reach them.
These kits are very, very useful, and it's worth saying that in particular high-risk areas like London, for example, Safeguard has worked very closely with the Metropolitan Police, with the local authorities, and there are at strategic locations multiple bleed kits stored around for exactly this reason, in that when you have not just one person but several people all with major hemorrhage, exactly the same principle applies, and that major hemorrhage needs to be controlled. It needs to be controlled very quickly.
The Bull's Head in Birmingham is one of the city's oldest and best known pubs. It led the way in placing bleed kits behind the bar, and now the whole of the Davenport's brewery chain has followed suit.
So all staff are trained, bar staff, floor staff, management, all of them are trained on how to use it. Just in case it was an instant thing that happened, anyone can apply it. Saves obviously wasting time, which is what that kit's for really, isn't it?
In recent weeks, the bleed control kits have been instrumental in saving the lives of 2 people who were stabbed in Birmingham and London.
I think it's absolutely wonderful that lives have been saved, which I said would happen at the beginning, and I'd just like to see these kits go all across the UK.
Nothing can ever really diminish the loss Lynn feels every day, but there is at least some comfort in the knowledge that lives are being saved in Daniel's memory. Mark White, GB News, Birmingham.
Very inspirational there, but I think it's also tragic. It's great that it saved lives already, but I think it's quite tragic that we need that kind of measure in the first place because of the amount of stabbings that are taking place in the country.
And a mother has had to fight on her own, basically, run a one-woman campaign in order to get these things out there. You would have thought that realistically more councils, more local governments, the government potentially could be doing more to get those things out there. We had it with defibrillators, didn't we? So why not get it with these blood kits?
Yes, indeed. Now, after the break, a new study finds that female soldiers and military personnel are at serious risk of bullying, harassment and abuse. We'll give you more on that later.
Well, but first, we're going to have a look at the latest headlines, apparently. Here we go.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Here are the latest headlines. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay rise after the Chancellor confirmed he will scrap the year-long pay freeze. Teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel are among those set to benefit. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public sector pay increases, with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 a year after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. The Parliamentary Committee on Standards has recommended that the Conservative MP Owen Paterson should be suspended for 30 days. An investigation into Paterson's lobbying for two companies he was a consultant for revealed an egregious case of paid advocacy. The former Cabinet Minister rejected the findings, accusing the Parliamentary Commissioner of making up her mind before she'd even spoken to him. The number of police officers facing disciplinary action over sexual misconduct allegations has spiked over the last 3 years. According to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, last year 70 police staff were accused of abusing their position for sexual purposes, compared to 10 in 2016. Well, between April 2018 and March this year, misconduct was proven in 63 cases, but 38 were sacked or able to resign. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations against him. Insulate Britain has declared the M25 a site of non-violent civil resistance starting from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Well, it comes after a new nationwide injunction was granted against the eco group following a day of further demonstrations. The climate activist group had paused action for 10 days but resumed its roadblock campaign yesterday. Environmental campaigners have scaled a government building in Westminster, urging COP26 to invest in a plant-based future. 4 activists from Animal Rebellion, it's an offshoot from Extinction Rebellion, used ropes and harnesses to climb the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. The group is demanding an end to subsidies for meat and dairy farming in a protest against climate change. They began the protest at 6 a.m. and say they plan to stay there indefinitely. Well, I'll have more on today's stories for you at 11 o'clock. But right now, back to Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, everybody. Now, women in the British military face a considerable risk of emotional bullying, sexual harassment and physical assault, according to a new survey. A study in the Military Health Journal says young officers and those in combat or combat support roles are more likely to suffer.
Yes, over 1/5 of those surveyed said they'd been sexually harassed and emotionally bullied, over 5% sexually assaulted. Women currently make up over 10% of our armed forces personnel, while Laura Hendricks is the lead author of the study and works for Combat Stress, the Veterans Mental Health Charity, and she joins us now. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. So tell us what this study found. Tell us the key findings here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think this study is a really interesting piece of work that's come out because it points out a couple of things to us. Firstly, it shows, as you mentioned already, that the adverse experiences that women may face in the military might not only include the combat or deployment-related traumas, but also includes experiences like sexual harassment, sexual assault, emotional bullying, and physical assault that women might be at risk at. And I think with the study as well, we were able to highlight a couple of key demographics that might increase the risk of women who might be facing those distressing experiences. For example, women who hold combat or combat-related roles or hold a rank as an officer during their time in service, but also younger women seem to be at higher risk from the study. And I think the most important takeaway from our findings here was that all these forms of distressing experiences, or what we've called adverse experiences during military service, all of them were associated with a greater chance of current symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as other symptoms of anxiety and depression, difficulties with alcohol use, loneliness, social isolation, and also an increased risk of showing mental health difficulties through physical symptoms, whether that be headaches or pain, that sort of thing. And the impact on the mental health are actually, we found it in a sample of women who've experienced adversity quite some time ago, because the sample in our study was about, a majority were about above 50 and 60 years of age. So kind of indicating that they've served previously, not just recently ended their service. And among these women, we found that they were still experiencing these ongoing difficulties with mental health and well-being. So really kind of indicating a lasting impact that these experiences can have on women after their service has ended.
Yes, and a lot of the the sort of conditions you described there, and would also, of course, be relevant to men as well. So a lot of the mental health stuff. So did you find that these sorts of symptoms, like the post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, and things like that, were more prevalent amongst women, or when it came to things like that, was it men as well?
So the prevalence seems to be more among women in the military, even though, of course, it does happen to men serving as well. And still that association with PTSD does remain there quite strongly for men who've endured these experiences as well. But with this study, we were focusing specifically on women who have served, because when you're looking at the research, there's very little known about the experiences of women during their time in service and the lasting impact on them. So with this study specifically, we're focusing only on female veterans, women veterans. But of course, we do know that from previous research, this does apply to males as well. Though, for example, with the other difficulties of maybe depression, anxiety, it might be a bit of different associations compared to women.
And you mentioned there that some of these women, the average age, I think you mentioned in their 50s, so these are women who'd served in the military or who might have joined the military a while ago. You work for a veterans mental health charity. Do you think currently the way our military is, it is a better place, a more inviting place for women than it once was?
I think absolutely. I think by the fact that we've opened up all roles to women as of 2018, it's showing that there's this movement to try to be as inclusive as possible. I think still there might be some risks there because of the culture that's maybe more typically associated with military settings or generally male-dominated work settings, that it might leave some women at higher risk for sexual assault, sexual harassment, that sort of thing. But it seems as though since those changes have kind of been moving in the right direction, there's also these changes to make sure that the military are actively trying to combat or kind of a zero tolerance of harassment, of assault, of those sorts of experiences. But I think it's still important to hold in mind that even though these policies are being put in place, there's still a lot of women who don't come forward to report those experiences because of the fears of doing so, whether that be being reprimanded by their superiors or being bullied by their peers in their local cohorts. So I think that might also indicate that there is some kind of level underneath still that needs further addressing to make sure that these women feel comfortable to come forward and report these experiences if they do happen to them. And there also needs to kind of be that focus as well on the mental health support that's made available for them should they be subjected to such adverse, distressing experiences.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for indeed the work that you are doing in your particular field. Laura Hendricks there, who is, of course, the lead author of the study that we were referring to there and works for Combat Stress, the Veterans Mental Health Charity. I think we can all agree, don't we? We need to do a lot more to help our veterans with their mental health. And indeed, actually, mental health is going to be something I'll be talking about a little bit later on. We've managed to get hold of some figures here at GBNews, which appear to show that whilst we know about one pandemic that's been taking place in this country, there very much is another one out there, and that is the mental health crisis. And also whether or not, I'm going to be asking anyway, whether or not now we have a bit of a duty, some of our top medical professionals in this country, the Chris Whitties of this world, and even our government officials, if you were going to introduce measures and you were going to introduce restrictions and those things were going to have an impact on people's mental health, should the next big push not be, and should they not have a duty to make sure that most people now can get better mental health care and quicker mental health care? But we'll be talking about that in a bit.
Yes, well, now let's go up to the Midlands, where businesses appear to be picking up for the travel industry as East Midlands Airport welcomes the most passengers in a weekend since before the pandemic began. 29,000 people used the airport between Friday and Sunday, and despite numbers only reaching half the amount they did when compared with 2019, travel bosses say they're still encouraging.
Yes, well, it comes as the government relaxes testing regulations. If fully vaccinated, you now only need to do a cheaper lateral flow test when you're flying instead of the more expensive but more accurate PCR test.
Yes, well, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us live from the airport. Will, this is sort of encouraging because it is the highest number since the pandemic, but it is still well below the figures before, isn't it?
Yes, Mercy, you're completely right. This is still only half of the numbers of passengers that you'd get travelling through East Midlands Airport before the pandemic began, way back in March 2020, around 9 to 18 months ago than it is now. But if you're somebody that works in the travel industry, if you're the boss of East Midlands Airport or the boss of the Manchester Airport Group, which owns East Midlands Airport, these are exactly the kind of numbers that you want to see because it shows growth. It shows that people are choosing to fly again. They are choosing to follow the new rules, the simplified system. That's what so many people in the travel industry have been banging on about for the last few months. They've been saying you need to simplify these rules, get rid of the traffic light system, make it easier for people to do things like lateral flow testing, which we've seen be introduced in the last couple of days. And it is working. If you just look back over summer, it was only 30% of travellers were 30% of pre-pandemic level was travelling through the airport. Now it's back up to 50%. People are making those decisions to travel. Some people, however, are choosing to travel regardless of whether they have had the vaccine or not. The NHS and the government are saying, please do get the vaccine, but other people are still very happy to get the PCR test and still follow that process. But regardless of which way you look at it, it shows that things are starting to recover. And when I was here on Friday, before the weekend began, before people started to jet off on their holidays, I spoke to a few people about why was now the right time to be heading off on their holidays.
For Mitchell and his family, the flight they're about to go on will be their first in 2 years. It's a well-needed holiday during the half-term break.
It's half-term this week. I'm a college teacher, and this is kind of half-term for us, so I've chosen this weekend to go away. We're quite excited about going now. It's still quite nerve-wracking, but we're still really excited to go.
You say you're a little bit nervous still. Why are you nervous, but why have you chosen that this is the right time to travel?
It's just everything that comes with travelling now. It's all the paperwork and stuff. I'm still panicking. I've left something at home, that sort of thing.
The teacher is one of thousands to fly from East Midlands Airport in search of sun during the school holidays. 29,000 people used the airport between Friday and Sunday. It's the busiest weekend here since the pandemic began.
We know there's a pent-up demand for travel. The bookings are really strong for next year. They're strong for this half term. it will be what it's always been. People want to go and see their family and friends. They want that summer and winter sunshine, and we're here to facilitate it.
Travelling in and out of Britain since the borders opened back in May has meant rigorous COVID checks for passengers. But now it's becoming much easier to fly freely. The government simplified the categories for countries you should and shouldn't travel to, and cheaper lateral flow tests can be used by fully vaccinated passengers instead of the more costly PCR tests. The changes have been welcomed by the travel industry.
We've asked for a much more lenient, less stringent testing regime, so we're capitalising on the success of the vaccine programme. So it's been very expensive for families to get away with the multiple tests that have been required. Now, if you're double vaccinated, all you require is a lateral flow test, which is much cheaper. You can get it sent to your house. You can go somewhere to get it done. So that, again, just takes the burden and makes travel a little bit more predictable and affordable for families to get away.
So far, the testing change only applies in England. It will be introduced in Wales too next week, and Scotland and Northern Ireland have indicated they'll follow the same route. For some passengers, lateral flow testing was one of the reasons they're choosing to travel now.
Double vaccinated now, and the testing's easier, so we're happy to go.
We're flying with the family now because obviously it's half term with the kids and that, and now it seems to be a lot more safer. And that with all the tests and everything.
While for others, it didn't make any difference.
We've chosen not to get vaccinated. I don't think enough people are educated that you don't have to be vaccinated to fly. So we've got to do the PCR test when we come back.
It's a more rigorous process for the people that haven't been vaccinated, but you're happy to go through that?
Yeah, of course, because ultimately we want to get away and enjoy the sun. We've got to probably isolate when we get back for 8 days, but that's part of the process, and we choose not to get the vaccination, so this is what we have to do. We're happy with that, and that's it.
People who aren't fully vaccinated must still do PCR tests and quarantine when arriving back in Britain. The government says the relaxed rules will help the travel industry recover. Health Secretary Sajid Javid said, "The huge boost to the travel industry will make it easier and cheaper for people to book holidays and travel abroad, and that all of this is possible because of the incredible vaccine programme." The travel industry is starting to recover. The number of passengers that you can see travelling from East Midlands Airport in this weekend alone is evidence of that. But there's still a very long way to go. Passenger levels are still only at about half of what they used to be before the pandemic, and it could take years before the industry ever fully recovers. Here, the figures of people flying aren't expected to return to normal until 2026. Ahead of the Chancellor's budget tomorrow, some in the travel industry have been asking for grants and tax cuts to aid recovery. However, rises in air passenger duty, reported in national newspapers as a way of addressing climate change, might make flying more expensive. Although the aviation industry is healing, the turbulence is not stopping yet. Now, just off camera earlier, I was speaking to a few flight attendants who were asking what I was doing, and I was explaining that it was the busiest weekend just gone, and one of the flight attendants said, "Oh, things are all back to normal," and I had to say, no, things definitely aren't back to normal. It's still a very long way to go until the travel industry is out of the woods. I'd be very hesitant to say that it's anywhere close to normal, but that halfway point does show that consumer growth in the industry is getting somewhere, and you can see probably in the background the people moving around. There's the same levels of stress that you'd see when people were traveling before the pandemic. People running to their flights and stressing about things like passports and paperwork. So there's at least an atmosphere which you might be able to call normal, but in terms of passenger levels, still only at half of what they were before the pandemic. But still, this is very encouraging for East Midlands Airport, at least.
Fantastic stuff. Well, thank you very much. Will Hollis there reporting from East Midlands Airport. As you could see, hopefully people can start getting back to normal and travelling around now. But anyway, talking of places abroad, some German playgrounds are to be built intentionally hostile and dangerous, in order to encourage children to be more resilient in overcoming obstacles that might do them harm. So, according to experts in child education and development, who were reliably informed are indeed completely normal and sane, making playgrounds too safe and attempting to eradicate all danger can not only increase the risk of injury, but can damage a child's self-confidence, problem-solving skills and mental health.
Yes, well, joining us now is child psychologist Dr. Amanda Gummer. Thank you for joining us this morning. Is this a good idea? I actually think it might help some children not be too soft.
So obviously we need to keep children safe, and nobody's encouraging people to be reckless with children's welfare. But there is an argument that playgrounds have been made overly safe, and that takes away some challenges and some risks. And what we need to do is teach children to risk assess in gradual sort of increments. So you teach children to jump off the bottom step, and then when they're confident doing that, they move up to the second step. You don't allow children to jump from the top step without having learn how to do that sort of step-by-step learning. And things like parkour and things like that, great for kids' confidence and agility and some really important skills around risk assessment. But you wouldn't just let them start running on that kind of stuff without the training. And I think that's where play comes in. It's giving children the opportunity to challenge themselves at their own level. You're not sort of forcing a child who doesn't want to climb a high climbing frame to go up higher than they're comfortable with. But what we want to do is encourage them to be able to have the opportunities to challenge themselves, to take risks and to manage those risks, where hopefully the worst that's going to happen is a grazed knee or a bump and a scratch, possibly a broken bone. But generally speaking, what you're learning is much better for your development, mental health, overall success in life, than being wrapped in cotton wool and never being allowed to,
Absolutely. But, then we send them to school, don't we? And we have no winners and losers on sports days anymore because we can't have little Timmy getting upset when he finishes last in the running race. And, then parents he fell off the jungle gym. Well, I've got to now sue my local council. I mean, are we ever realistically going to see any of this stuff, do you think?
I really hope so. And I think play is such a positive force, and giving parents that confidence to let their children play out, creating those safe spaces for children to play without worrying about real dangers, things like traffic and antisocial behaviour, but giving them safe spaces to encourage children to play out with minimal supervision, where children can be kids and develop those really important skills. It's a win-win because the parents are frazzled as well, and we need to give parents a bit of a break to let them know that they don't have to be their children's entertainer 24/7. The kids can play, and they get a lot of benefit from playing with their peers, outside, taking some risks, creating their own play patterns. It's all really good stuff, and I think we do need to help parents feel a bit more comfortable and confident in letting their children do that.
Just want to get you quickly, Amanda, because I'm sorry, we're a bit pressed for time at the moment. I'm about to have a bit of a chat with our viewers about mental health, specifically geared towards the youth. I've just got into possession of some figures which are pretty damning, actually, and I think warrant being spoken about. How bad do you think this coronavirus crisis, and indeed our response to it, has been when it comes to the impact on children's mental health in this country?
I think it's been huge. I think there was already a deterioration in mental health before the pandemic, and I think this has exacerbated it. And I think one of the key issues is that lack of agency. Kids are being done to. Kids are being told what to do. They're giving, and that sort of the uncertainty. They don't have any control over their life. And I think that again is where, if we are able to promote play, let children play positively and freely, the benefits for their mental health are absolutely massive.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Dr. Amanda Gummer, thank you so much for your time this morning, child psychologist there.
Yes, well, keep all your thoughts coming into us on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I honestly think this might have been one of our most emailed into shows, so keep those coming. We'll go to those very shortly. We'll have plenty of your views after this break.
Good morning. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We're here until midday bringing you the top stories of the day.
We are indeed. Now, make sure you get in touch with us as well. Your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be reading those out throughout the show. As I said before, do honestly think it's one of the most emailed into shows, so keep them coming. But right now, time for your latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. Millions of public sector workers are in line for a pay rise after the Chancellor confirmed he will scrap the year-long pay freeze. The change is part of tomorrow's budget and it will impact teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public sector pay increases, with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 a year after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. Former Cabinet Minister David Mellor says it's saddening billions are being given to the NHS, considering the country's national debt and the amount of money spent during the pandemic.
Why do I feel depressed about all of this? You know, when I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, sadly, 30 years ago, the national debt was 30% of the gross domestic product of this country in any given year. Now it's well over 100%. The amount of money that has been spent on this pandemic is over £400 billion, an almost impossible figure for most people, including indeed myself, to contemplate. And yet we are now apparently going to have another budget where more billions are being given to the NHS.
The Independent Office for Police Conduct say the number of police officers they've probed for allegations of sexual misconduct has spiked over the last 3 years. Last year, they investigated 70 police staff accused of abusing their position for sexual purposes. In 2016, they investigated 10. Between April of 2018 and March of this year, the IOPC proved the misconduct of 63 individuals, 38 of whom were either sacked or resigned.
I think misconduct can come in many forms and it reflects the culture sometimes, and it's really important that there is a culture in policing that has a zero tolerance of any form of behaviour that is misogynist, is sexist, is homophobic. There is just no place for that in modern policing. We want to see forces sending out that message. We want to see individual officers calling out their fellow officers, which we do see, but we'd like to see more of that. And we'd like to see forces really emphasising to officers that this behaviour is wrong and that there are consequences, as we're seeing today when you're caught.
The mother of two murdered sisters, Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, has dismissed an apology from the Met Police. The force apologised to the family for their initial response to reports they were missing. The sisters were found dead in a North London park in June last year. Daniel Hussein will be sentenced for the double murder this week. Met Commissioner Cresta Dick says the force's handling of the case was below the standard it should have achieved. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Virginia Giuffre is seeking unspecified damages from the 61-year-old. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations made against him, and his lawyer has dismissed the accusations as baseless. Former manager of Rangers, Walter Smith, has died aged 73. Smith led Rangers to 10 wins in top titles, as well as to the UEFA Cup final in 2018. In his career, he also managed the Scottish national team and Everton. The club chairman, Douglas Park, said that Walter will be sorely missed by all of us at Rangers. Insulate Britain has declared the M25 a site of non-violent civil resistance starting from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. It comes after a new nationwide injunction was granted against the eco group following a day of further demonstrations. The climate activist group had paused demonstrations for 10 days but resumed its roadblock campaign yesterday. The Department for Transport said the High Court had granted the interim injunction against members of the climate change group who caused disruption on any part of the strategic road network in England. Environmental campaigners have scaled a government building in Westminster, urging world leaders to invest in a plant-based future. 4 activists from Animal Rebellion, they're an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, climbed the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They began protesting at 6 o'clock this morning and say they plan to stay there indefinitely. James, on the side of the building, told GB News the UK government's priorities are wrong.
The UK government is being a public nuisance by spending £1.5 billion of taxpayer money on subsidies for the meat and dairy industry. That's an industry that is ultimately killing the planet and killing billions of animals. In the meantime, it's spending 150 million, that's 10% of that, on planting trees and similarly on alternative proteins. It goes to show like the government's priorities in terms of propping up unsustainable and unprofitable industries over what's ultimately better for the public and for the planet.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, let's return to The Point with Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point right here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Maroki. And we've got a final hour full of today's top stories, top guests, and of course those big talking points, so keep those views coming in.
Yes, it's good news for small businesses from the Chancellor, who's expected to announce a new £130 million fund to help entrepreneurs get back on track after the pandemic. We'll be in Wales to see how that's going to impact the region.
Yes, we will indeed. Now, a US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. We'll discuss what this means for him and indeed the royal family.
Yes, and astronomers have found hints of what could be the first planet to be discovered outside our galaxy. We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch, of course, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on the mental health pandemic.
We need to talk about the pandemic. No, not that one, not the coughy sneezy one, not the one that has a vaccine, not the one that we will inevitably be out of soon and poses no real risk to children. The other pandemic, the one with, as yet, no known cure, the one that's growing by the day, the one that throughout history has robbed more children of fathers and mothers and more mothers and fathers of their children than anything before it. The one that Chris Whitty is yet to do a little slideshow about. I'm talking about the mental health pandemic. Now, here at GB News, we've managed to get hold of some of the latest figures, and they make grim reading. But I'm going to give you them in a second, because I want to make one point almost immediately here. Chris Whitty, Boris Johnson, Jonathan Van Tam, Patrick Vallance, Sage, frankly, the government, they were all pushing for rules and regulations that, by definition, will have had a massive impact on people's mental health, especially, as it turned out, young people. Now, if they think that they can declare mission accomplished when the case numbers drop and that we all just move on, then they've got another thing coming. The consequences of their decisions will last forever in some people's heads, and it needs to last forever in theirs. Data analysis by mental health charity Mind reveals that more people have experienced a mental health crisis during the pandemic than ever previously recorded. But these figures only show up to July 2020, so we've got another year and a bit of this data to hit us yet. So if you think that these numbers are bad now, goodness knows what the current reality is like. There's been a 15% rise in children's mental health service referrals from March until July 2020. There were 2,276 more urgent and emergency referrals made in July 2020 alone compared to July 2019. A 19% increase in people detained for mental health treatment as well, who were admitted to acute beds. And there's been a huge spike in calls made to Mind's helpline. For a bit of context as well, every single day in the UK, 12 men take their own lives. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into this. Young people can often feel very entitled, I'll admit that. The Instagram generation, we want it all, don't we? We want a fast car, nice holidays, £30 rooftop cocktails, expensive meals out, as well as the chance to get on the property ladder and all of that jazz as well. How often did we hear self-entitled little brats telling old Brexiteers that it didn't matter because they'd be dead soon and we'd rejoin the European Union? But it's not those people that I'm talking about now. There is a very genuine and very acute mental health crisis taking place right now among the young population. These figures, the latest ones, show children waited an average of 2 months to begin treatment. That's double the government's 4-week target. The government is unlikely to meet its target, by the way, by 2022 and 2023. The longest median wait times, and this is shocking, were in West London, where apparently children had to wait about 6 months for a mental health referral. South Tyneside as well, and Sunderland, 129 days. In the last year, there's been a 35% increase in child mental health referrals. Among students, suicides have risen by 20 people a year since 2017, and the latest numbers show that 174 students killed themselves. 121 of those, by the way, were men. Now, the government pledged around £12 billion in mental health funding, and the problem is, it's not really clear where that's going. Look, we've spent a lot of time focusing on an illness that has its biggest impact on the elderly, and rightly so, absolutely rightly so. But we're coming out of that now, and in its place is another pandemic that disproportionately affects the young. We could end up with a lost generation. The brain affects everything, and the young are the future of this nation. So it goes without saying that we need to make sure that youth mental health is in a good place. If Chris Whitty really cares about public health, then I'd expect to see a few slideshows about how he intends to get this country out of the mental health crisis that I believe his decision-making helped to create. Yeah, some shocking figures there, of course. And I know that mental health does affect everyone, old and young, but it's just because some of those figures there, of course, do relate specifically to the younger generation. So I thought I'd raise that.
It makes me despair, I think. I despair when I think about some of the waiting times, and particularly for children, because it must be agonising for the parents to sort of have to not just wait for their children to may or may not, do the worst thing possible because they're not getting the treatment they need. I don't know what the government plans to do. I don't know if they do have a grand strategy for how they're going to tackle this problem. I don't necessarily have faith in them to do that. But I think, the most immediate thing is to make sure people are seen as soon as they need that help and to get the right help they need. And I just don't think the NHS is in a state to provide that kind of help.
Well, no, I mean, yes, it certainly doesn't seem that way. I think there's clearly so many different things going on here all at once in a way. But I think one of the big things for me is, of course, those waiting times and getting those waiting times for children's mental health down. If you're in a really seriously bad way with your mental health and you're having to wait 6 months, well, frankly, that can be deadly. And then as well, you see the knock-on effects, because in families, apparently, where there's been a suicide, it apparently is therefore more likely that someone else in that family may then take their own lives. But for me, it's an attitudinal thing from our government and from our top medical professionals. And that's the thing that I really want to see. If you are going to impact, or at least hover the sword of Damocles over our heads, on the reg about whether or not we are going to have any personal freedoms, whether you can go to university, whether you can have social lives, whether or not there's going to be a new mutant ninja variant that's going to come and level us all, then can you do us the common courtesy of helping to sort out the mental health crisis that will inevitably lead to? But anyway.
Yes, well, keep your views coming into us on that issue and anything else, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But we can now speak to Ben West, who is a mental health activist and Diana Award Legacy winner who lost his own brother to suicide in 2018. His petition to make mental health first aid a compulsory part of teacher training has over 300,000 signatures. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Ben. What should the government be doing right now? How much worse is this problem than it was before the pandemic?
Well, I think it's one of the most important issues that we face today. And like you've been saying already, we've had this pandemic, this physical disease, this physical pandemic, and we've tackled that. And I think you can sort of equate mental health and physical health in this circumstance. And with the pandemic, we've done two things. We've invested in the vaccine. We've invested in ways of treating the pandemic and treating the virus. And we've also engaged in public awareness. We've taught people about washing our hands, okay? And in a very similar way, the government needs to use that same principle to look at mental health. We need treatment. We need the NHS to be able to offer effective care for those people that do need it. And we need that to be effective and in a timely manner as well. My brother took his own life in 2018. A week after he died, an appointment on the NHS was available. And if anything, to me, that just speaks so much of the issue that's at heart. A week after he died was his opportunity to get help. And I think so many people fall into that bracket. But as well as treatment, we need that public awareness. We need education. So many people say, look after your mental health. How do we do that? We're not taught that in schools. I certainly wasn't at school. No. And for me, like we said about the petition I launched, I think the first point that we need to get is teachers cannot be sent in to do their job without this knowledge when we know this is the pandemic that needs tackling now.
Yeah, 100%. Do you worry that there's not the political will there, that there's not potentially the will amongst some of the higher-ups, even in the medical community?
I think that there's two real conversations around mental health. There's what we call the pretty conversation, which looks good on billboards, with the pin that the prime ministers and politicians wear. It's the conversation of let's talk about mental health, which of course is really, really important. But there is undeniably an ugly conversation here. And the ugly conversation is that for a lot of people, they are talking, they are doing everything they can to get help. They are doing everything, they are ticking the right boxes, and they're still dying. And they're not getting that help. And really, if we want to make actual change going forward, we need politicians, we need leaders to not just do PR and talk about mental health as this thing that's really important and use it as a buzzword, but actually invest, look into what we need to do more of and help those people that need it.
Yeah, and some people would say by the time somebody's having to sort of seek, mental health support on the NHS, it's almost too late, so to speak, especially if they're having to wait, like your brother, so long to even get that help. What can we be doing, really, as a society to tackle some of the underlying causes why some people might develop mental health problems? Of course, some people, it's a natural thing that will happen anyway. But we're not helping, are we, as a society, particularly for young people and all the pressures that they're facing these days?
Absolutely, and you're so right. What we see is because there is such a demand on the mental health service, we have to be really selective about who gets that support. And so what happens is the criteria for accessing support is so ludicrously high that unless you're suicidal or at risk of harm imminently, you're not going to be given priority on that support. So the people that are most treatable, the people that need that support early on, they are not given support because the people that are so far into their illness that they are imminently going to die if they don't get support are given that support. So you're right, and I think that goes back to schools. If we're really serious about reducing the burden on the NHS and reducing that demand, we need to look at schools, we need to educate children. What can they be doing to look after their mental health? This isn't talking about, maybe having a lesson in sixth form or when you're 16, 15 years old. We're talking right down to 4 years old. Children's literature, when they learn to read, let's introduce themes of mental health into that. What can you do if you're struggling? Now, I remember reading Biff and Chip as a kid, and we talk about, learning to read and all these adventures they go on. I've got a friend that's writing children's literature and actually focusing on, Biff is not feeling great today. Yeah. He talks to his friend about it. And actually, if we can embed that into our education system from day one, that's how we create change.
I think you hit the nail on the head because, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying we've got a book called Pippa Gets the Vaccine. Well, what about, with Pippa's mental health?
Exactly.
Why not? If we can do one, why can't we do the other? I find that astonishing. Let's just confront something else, really, which is male mental health, right? And obviously, any death or anyone suffering with any form of mental health is a tragedy. But most people who kill themselves in this country, as far as I'm aware, are men. The figure seems to be higher there. What is that about, do you think? Why is that? How can we... I know this is almost an unanswerable question, but how can we sort that out? Because that does seem to be a real curse at the moment.
Absolutely. And all indicators point to the fact that men are more likely to take their own lives than women. 75% of suicides in the UK are men. And so it's a particular area of focus that we need to take. I think with men, there is a reluctance to be open and honest about our emotions. It's seen as some sort of weakness. I know for me personally, right up until the moment Sam died, I'd never thought about mental health before. In my friend group, they were quite a huggy friend group. I always used to not hug them. I didn't want to hug because I thought that was a sign of weakness. I thought showing that vulnerability was a sign of weakness. And I think a lot of men face that. We go and put up this front and we want to compete and be alpha male and have that masculinity inside us. And actually, that is a barrier for a lot of people. I think most people out there can recognise when something's not right, can recognise when they're not feeling okay. And what we've created is actually a society that, for everyone, not just men, but particularly for men, knowing there's something wrong and actually admitting to other people there's something wrong, there are so many barriers to stopping us doing that. And I think actually going forward, and this comes back to education, it comes back to schools, we need to start working out why that's happening in society, teaching men that actually not only is it okay to talk, it's one of the most important things you can do. And also, I'll just say this, I think sometimes the conversation around mental health is targeted at those people that are struggling. If we're serious about creating change, the most important conversation that needs to happen is not the people that are struggling with their mental health, it's the people that aren't. If you're not struggling with your mental health, you are the most important person at normalising this conversation because we don't normalise this by letting the people that need to talk about it. We normalise it by all of us talking about this.
Yeah. And Ben, finally, what if somebody's struggling right now? What would you advise them to do? Who do they get in touch with?
Yeah, absolutely. So those people out there that are struggling, first of all, I take my hat off to you. Everyone I've met that's been in that position, that has attempted suicide, they're some of the strongest people I've ever met. You know, there's this misconception that mental illness and suicide is weak, and that's absolutely couldn't be further from the truth. If you're struggling, you know, we do talk about GPs and we talk about the NHS not being technically ready or being over demanded and understaffed, but that is an incredibly important place to go if you are struggling. Go to a GP, have that conversation, talk to your friends and family, make sure that if you are not feeling okay, have those conversations, talk to the people you love, talk to a GP, get the help you need, because it is out there if you chase it.
Well, thank you, Ben West there, mental health campaigner. Thank you for your time, Ben. Well, after the break, a surge in knife crime has led one mother to take a stand and demand bleed control kits to be rolled out across the country. We look into her tragic reason behind her project. That's after the weather.
Hello there. Autumn is very much with us across the UK. Often quite cloudy out there through the day today. Some wet weather to come across Scotland, but very mild for this time of year. Now that's all down to our air coming up from the southwest. You can see these warm yellows and oranges produced across the map means that it is going to be a pretty mild picture. We have got weather fronts up towards Scotland, bringing some rain and some fairly tightly packed isobars, which bring a strong wind as well. Let's take a look at the picture across Scotland. We've already had some quite heavy rain pushing its way through during this morning. A brief lull in that rain, but then it turns heavier and more persistent for the Western Isles and Western Highland later on in the day. Strong and gusty winds, gusts of 50 miles an hour here. Elsewhere, quite a lot of cloud across the country. A few bright or sunny breaks, but very mild for this time of year. Highs of 17 degrees Celsius. Through this evening then, that rain starts to edge its way a little bit further east and southwards, getting into Northern Ireland through the evening, and then later in the night getting through into Northern England as well. To the south of it, it stays very mild. We'll have a few bits and pieces of drizzle across Western Hills. These are the temperatures we should be seeing by daytime in October, not the overnight temperatures with a keen breeze. As we go through Wednesday morning then, we've got this rain pushing its way in and persisting through much of the day. You can see it really doesn't move very quickly. So we have a rain warning in force. There is the risk of some flooding through Cumbria, southwest Scotland, some difficult travelling conditions as well. 1 or 2 showers to the west of Scotland. To the south of that rain band, another very mild day, highs of 18 degrees Celsius. That's 64 in Fahrenheit with a keen southwesterly breeze. As we go through Wednesday evening, then we'll continue to see this rain just trickling a little bit further southwards into northwest Wales. It stays on the mild side, a few clear spells as we go into the overnight period. And then it turns more unsettled more widely across the country through Thursday and Friday. Strong winds, the risk of some heavy rain. And as we head into the weekend, temperatures sliding away. I'll see you later.
Yes, well, good morning, everybody. And we're going to go straight into my inbox now because, like I've said all throughout the show, actually, it's been one of our most emailed into shows. We thought it was only fair to keep going to you and give you your voice, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Initially, I think a lot of you were getting in touch about the idea for no jab, no job in our NHS and what you felt about that. No jab, no job is obscene. Not just for our NHS workers, but for any job or profession. It's our body and it's our freedom of choice. That's from one of you. And then there's another one as well. Everyone loved the fact that nurses were looking after patients with COVID and saving lives last year without a vaccine. We clapped for them. Now we're treating them like criminals. We've gone from fascism to communism here in the inbox, and that just expresses the range of views. However, also it's fair to say that a lot of you are getting in touch to say that you think that anyone who wouldn't get a job, wouldn't get a jab even in the NHS, should lose their job. And I think it was Deirdre actually did say as well. How would you feel about your relative being treated by someone who's not had the jab?
I think so. The data from Public Health England, this was from April 2021, showed that one dose of the Pfizer or AstraZeneca led to between 38% and 49% likelihood decrease in household transmission, basically. So the vaccine does reduce, it does seem to reduce, according to the data, transmission to a considerable extent. It's not negligible, 38 to 49%. And I think that is the justification, I guess, that the government are using, that yes, you can still get the virus and you can still pass it on even if you've been double jabbed, but it does reduce the likelihood that you'll transmit it.
It does. And I think Martin has in a way hit the nail on the head here. Martin in Manchester, it's near my neck of the woods. Thank you very much, Martin. Says, you said, Patrick, that you wouldn't be happy if a relative of yours caught coronavirus from an unvaccinated nurse and died. How would you feel if they caught it from a vaccinated nurse and died? And that's kind of the point, Martin, isn't it, really? Which is that whilst it does reduce, obviously, the ability for you to pass it on, it doesn't nullify it completely. But, hey, look, a range of views there. And thank you very much for everyone who's been in touch. gbviews at gbnews.uk. It's a very contentious topic, that, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Yes, and another issue that's not going away soon is knife crime. And with another surge in knife crime and authorities warning of a fresh wave of terror attacks, a Birmingham mother whose own son was killed in a stabbing has told GB News that bleed control kits are urgently needed across the country. Lynn Baird has fought a one-woman campaign to have the packs of heavy-duty bandages and tourniquets installed at key locations in towns and cities.
Yes, so far 2,000 kits have been distributed and have already been instrumental in saving the lives of 2 people stabbed recently in Birmingham and in London. Well, our Home and Security editor Mark White reports from Birmingham for us.
Daniel went out for a night. There was some kind of altercation in the pub. It was nothing to do with him at all, and he was stabbed, and I didn't see him again.
In the 4 years since her son was stabbed and killed, Lynn Baird has fought a relentless campaign to do something positive in Daniel's memory. She is a remarkable woman who came up with the simple but highly effective idea for these specialist bleed control kits to help stem catastrophic blood loss long enough for expert help to arrive.
It's really got everything you would need. This tourniquet, obviously, I mean, for shutting off the extremities if you've got a big serious arterial bleed.
Yeah, military grade. Trauma bandage, that's for severe bleeding, and practically foolproof to use as well.
Lynn believes that a simple bleed kit could have saved her own son.
There was no time. If there had been one of these kits in the pub and it had been used, we might have a different story now.
You're convinced of that?
Oh, yeah. That's what made me carry on with this campaign.
With no end in sight to the epidemic of violent crime in many of our towns and cities, bleed control kits are now being rolled out more widely. More than 2,000 so far, with demand growing by the day. The Midlands Air Ambulance attend an average of 4 serious stabbings and shootings a week, and many more incidents where catastrophic blood loss is a key concern. Without a doubt, the Midlands Air Ambulance offers the very best critical care outside of the hospital environment, and they can get a patient to hospital in a fraction of the time it takes a land ambulance to do that. But there's no point in them even attending if a patient bleeds out before they arrive. More than 60% of call-outs for the air ambulance are trauma-related, where severe blood loss is common.
If someone has a cardiac arrest in the street, a defibrillator gets there and can make the difference in 30 seconds. Yet if somebody has a catastrophic bleed, where do you get the equipment that's going to save that life? So things like the bleed control kits, like the citizen aid advice that's available, and like the first aid training that's out there, those things together will save lives, and the interventions available in this kit will absolutely stop a catastrophic hemorrhage in the right place in the right time.
The murder of Sir David Amess has highlighted the continuing threat from terrorism, with authorities warning of the possibility of a fresh wave of attacks. Senior trauma specialists say bleed control kits, coupled with increased first aid training programmes, can help arm the public to better respond and help those caught up in an attack, where it can often be some time before medical help can reach them.
These kits are very, very useful, and it's worth saying that in particular high-risk areas like London, for example, Safeguard has worked very closely with the Metropolitan Police, with the local authorities, and there are at strategic locations multiple bleed kits stored around for exactly this reason, in that when you have not just one person but several people all with major hemorrhage, exactly the same principle applies, and that major hemorrhage needs to be controlled. It needs to be controlled very quickly.
The Bull's Head in Birmingham is one of the city's oldest and best known pubs. It led the way in placing bleed kits behind the bar, and now the whole of the Davenport's brewery chain has followed suit.
So all staff are trained, bar staff, floor staff, management, all of them are trained on how to use it. Just in case it was an instant thing that happened, anyone can apply it. Saves obviously wasting time, which is what that kit's for really, isn't it?
In recent weeks, the bleed control kits have been instrumental in saving the lives of 2 people who were stabbed in Birmingham and London.
I think it's absolutely wonderful that lives have been saved, which I said would happen at the beginning, and I'd just like to see these kits go all across the UK.
Nothing can ever really diminish the loss Lynn feels every day, but there is at least some comfort in the knowledge that lives are being saved in Daniel's memory. Mark White, GB News, Birmingham.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for bringing us that pretty moving package. Well, look, after the break, Prince Andrew has been served a deadline by a US judge to submit to questioning about the sexual assault allegations made against him. We'll be looking at all of that after this short news update.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. The Independent Office for Police Conduct say the number of police officers they've probed for allegations of sexual misconduct has spiked over the last 3 years. Teachers, nurses, police and armed forces personnel are going to get a pay rise from April. Last November, Rishi Sunak paused public sector pay increases, with the exception of the NHS and those earning less than £24,000 after heavy borrowing during the pandemic. We'll have more on these announcements tomorrow with the budget. The Parliamentary Committee on Standards has recommended that Conservative MP Owen Paterson should be suspended for 30 days. An investigation into Paterson's lobbying for 2 companies he was a consultant for revealed an egregious case of paid advocacy. The former Cabinet Minister rejected the findings, accusing the Parliamentary Commissioner of making up her mind before she'd even spoken to him. A US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath in the civil sexual assault case against him. Both the Duke of York and his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, must complete written statements on or before the 14th of July. Prince Andrew has repeatedly denied the allegations that he sexually assaulted Miss Giuffre when she was a teenager. Insulate Britain have declared the M25 a site of non-violent civil resistance, starting from 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Well, it comes after a new nationwide injunction was granted against the group following a day of further demonstrations. The climate activists had paused their protesting for 10 days, but resumed its roadblock campaign yesterday. Environmental campaigners have scaled a government building in Westminster, urging COP26 to invest in a plant-based future. Four activists from Animal Rebellion, an offshoot of Extinction Rebellion, used ropes and harnesses to climb the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. The group is demanding an end to subsidies for meat and dairy farming in a protest against climate change. They began the protest at 6 a.m. and say they plan to stay there indefinitely. The former manager of Rangers, Walter Smith, has died aged 73. Smith led Rangers to 10 wins in top titles, as well as the UEFA Cup final in 2008. In his career, he also managed the Scottish national team and Everton. The club chairman, Douglas Park, said that Walter will be sorely missed by all of us at Rangers. You're up to date here. I'll be back with more on today's top stories at 12 o'clock. But for now, back to Patrick and Mercy.
Now, primary and secondary schools across the UK will be collecting football boots today as part of football's biggest ever environmental campaign called Football Rebooted, endorsed by former England goalkeeper David James. It was created with the mission of rehoming 1 million pairs of good quality football boots to save them from landfill.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm very pleased to say that David James, a former England goalkeeper, joins us now. Fantastic. Thank you very much for making the time for us. Well, look, run us through this campaign then.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. First of all, I just have to say sad news about Walter Smith today. So just to sort of pay my respects to that. With regards to the campaign, as you rightly said, what we're trying to do with Utility Energy is rehome 1 million pairs of usable football boots, the pairs of boots which are left in cupboards, left in the back of people's cars. Not only does it allow them to be reused by people who love wanting to go out and play football, but also environmentally, it stops potentially 1 million pairs of boots going into landfill, which is something that we want to avoid. So the campaign is now going into schools, and hopefully we can achieve our goal.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, I think it sounds like a great idea. I can remember when I was younger and playing, you could go through, you know, a pair of football boots once, twice a season. I imagine, did you used to have a new pair every game? David, what was your policy?
Yeah, I didn't quite have one.
I wasn't trying to dig you out. I wasn't trying to dig you out.
no. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I got so excited about getting involved. That in my career, I had so many pairs of boots. Sponsors were sending me new boots. I didn't wear them all. I kept them a bit of a hoarder. The wonderful thing about the campaign is, as an ex-player, I'm getting involved, but more importantly, there are current players in the Premier League across the football spectrum, if you like, who are all donating. I was in my local school a few weeks ago to start the launch. School kids are getting involved, and where I've got still quite a few pairs of boots, I'm looking to put them into the Football Rebooted campaign, because essentially, financially, there's a lot of families struggling out there. Kids are getting bigger, feet are getting bigger, and they're struggling to find the boots to wear so they can get the mental, physical and social benefits of having a kick around in football.
Do you think footballers are seeing themselves almost as social campaigners almost these days? We've seen Marcus Rashford and all the things he's been doing for feeding kids and, of course, reading as well, actually.
Yeah.
There's been all this activism around Black Lives Matter and social justice issues, and now this as well. Do you think that's a role more footballers are taking, being seen as sort of activists for social issues?
I'd like to say that I think because of the where we are at the moment, obviously with regards to technology, the access to people in general globally through social media outlets, whatever, more players are being noticed, and that's a wonderful thing because it's not the first time that footballers have got involved with campaigns. Myself and other footballers have been doing this for many years. The Premier League and a lot of football clubs, I have to say, sort of a big up to some of the football clubs. Man City celebrated their 35th year of a community, being a community club. Watford Football Club was another club that had been doing this for decades. So the fact that people are getting noticed, I mean, I know the messages are important and the environment right now with the COP21, forgive me, just around the corner, these messages need to be heard because everyone has their purpose in this. Everyone has an opportunity. And where we're trying to find 1 million new homes for football boots in England, this is something that could be globally done. And it doesn't just have to be football. It's more about recycling, reusing, and getting the best use out of a piece of equipment, which can still be used and someone could use it who can't afford to get it from shops.
Absolutely. No, I honestly think it's just such a cracking idea. So if I was, a parent now watching this and, I was desperate to get hold of some new football boots for my kids, obviously maybe didn't quite have the money necessarily to go out and buy them new or whatever, how do I get in touch with you guys? How do I make sure that I can get involved with your programme?
Yeah, well, it's not just the parents. There'll be kids watching as well. You go to footballrebooted.co.uk. And this isn't about, I have to say, this is not about elitism. As much as we talk about Marcus Rashford, it's not about the next Marcus Rashford. It's not about the next Beth Mead. This is just about kids being able to want to go out, enjoy themselves with a comfortable pair of football boots on rather than squashing their feet or, worst case, not going out in the first place. So footballrebooted.co.uk. Go there, you get all the information. And see, again, with regards to what schools will be involved to keep it localised.
Fantastic. Now, I've got to have a quick word with you just lastly, because I am, for my sins, a Manchester United fan. You obviously spent a lot of time at Liverpool and then at City. And it's fair to say that your lot turned us over at the weekend, didn't you? 5-0 at Old Trafford. I mean, look, what's your take on the situation there at Manchester United? Do you think there maybe some changes need to happen?
Well, I have to say, for all the rivalry that I had as a player, and that continues, I've still got friends, and as you can imagine, the amount of laugh emojis that was sent after that result. But at the same time, I'm a football lover, and Manchester United have got an amazing squad. Something needs to change, and I don't know if it's necessarily personnel. I've been in that position myself as a manager. Sometimes the coaching staff and the manager needs to sit down and say, are we doing the right things? And it seems obvious from the outside, but sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees and you think that what you're doing is going to work out. So, I wouldn't want anyone to get sacked just for the sake of getting sacked, but the opportunity needs to be there for Manchester United to be able to turn it around, because I'm saying that if they kept it, then that could mean that Liverpool, Man City could win against Manchester United again. I don't know. I'm just a competitor.
There you go. I think that the imagery, I mean, gosh, it made me feel sick of the Liverpool fans singing Ollie's at the wheel and the away end at Old Trafford. It turned my stomach. But David, thank you very, very much. Really, really appreciate
My pleasure.
You coming on, and cracking campaign as well. So fingers crossed you do actually really change lives. I'm sure you will. Football rebooted, ladies and gentlemen. One last cheeky little plug there, so get involved.
Yeah, you liked that, didn't you?
Like David James.
Yes.
Anyway, right, moving on.
Yes, moving on to our next story. After a difficult year and a half for everybody, some sectors were hit harder than others, and small and medium-sized businesses were an example of this, as many struggled to secure governmental support to stay afloat, but didn't have the capital to manage alone. While the Chancellor is expected to announce a new £130 million fund to help thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises in Wales. At this week's budget, the fund will be delivered through the British Business Bank and will help Welsh firms to invest and grow.
Yes, well, our Wales reporter, Lily Hewitt-Cern, has the latest on all of this now, and this essential boost for small entrepreneurs in the region.
Good morning. Yes, more money is always good news for small businesses here in Wales. In 2019, they actually accounted for 62.4% of employment here. And as the Chancellor is expected to announce that new fund of £130 million at tomorrow's spending review, the possibility of this money is being welcomed by the Welsh Conservatives. I'm joined now by James Evans, the member of the Senedd for Brecon and Radnorshire. Thank you for joining us on the Great British Breakfast, James. Firstly, I just want to ask, what difference is this money going to make for small businesses here in Wales if it is announced?
If this funding is to be announced, Lily, this is going to have a huge impact for businesses right across Wales, from North Wales, Mid Wales, East Wales and West Wales, because what we've seen is Welsh Government investment has always been targeted in the South Wales, in Cardiff, your Newport and your Swansea. Parts of the valleys in Blaen y Gwent, for example, have been neglected, especially my constituency of Brecon and Radnorshire, Montgomeryshire. So it's really going to help businesses right across the country as part of the UK government's levelling up agenda, giving businesses that opportunity. As we've seen, this fund across the UK has been helped, it's created high-skilled jobs, it's increased productivity and it's upskilled the workforce. This is really, really important. And this fund, which has been similar in England, has provided loans and also help with investment in start-up businesses. And our small businesses are the backbone of our economy here in Wales, and they need to be protected. And I'm so pleased that the funding, if it is announced, is going to be coming to Wales to protect our small and medium-sized businesses.
Now, there were some figures floating around yesterday from the Welsh Liberal Democrats that I just want to mention. They claim that Wales received less post-Brexit support for small businesses than any other UK nation. England received £7.2 million, whereas Wales received just £230,000. Is this money that might be announced tomorrow just kind of making up for that big discrepancy in funds there, or is it actually something completely different?
Well, no, what we've seen, Lee, over the years is that the Welsh Labour government here in Wales have not invested properly right across the country. As I've said, they've invested in certain parts of Wales, that's in South Wales, which, ironically, for the last 5 years, they've been supported by the Liberal Democrats in power, which hasn't levelled up Wales, which has neglected small businesses across the country. The UK government during coronavirus invested heavily in Wales. It supported 460,000 jobs. It helped 173,000 self-employed people right across Wales. The UK government cares about Wales. It wants to level up our country and make sure that we can be as productive as possible, to make sure that we're enhancing ourselves on a global stage and being part of the United Kingdom and not part of this separatist agenda, which is being driven by Welsh Labour.
But those figures there is quite a big difference. So the amount of money that was given to small businesses in England is 7.2 million, whereas Wales was just 230,000. That is quite a huge difference, though. So surely this money is kind of making up that difference.
I don't think that's right. As I said, the UK government is heavily invested. It's up to the Welsh government where they spend their money. And I think more information needs to come out from them is actually where they put a lot of their grant funding over the years. And as I said, that has always been in South Wales. I know businesses in my part of the world which have been told to relocate into South Wales and leave parts of Mid Wales because they'd be able to access grant funding. I don't think that's fair. And I think the UK government doing as much as they can now to invest in Wales to make sure, as I said, that we've got that level playing field right across the UK, and this money is going to help all our small and medium-sized businesses right across Wales to increase our productivity, to create highly skilled jobs and make Wales an attractive place for people to come, live and work, because that's what I think is very important. It helps build our local economies and our smaller economies here in Wales and actually help boost jobs, as I've said earlier, which helps fund our vital public services, which we all rely on.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Great British Breakfast this morning. And that was James Evans, the member of the Senedd for Brecon and Radnorshire. So we will have to see in that budget tomorrow whether there will be that funding there for small businesses here in Wales. But it sounds like it may well be the case.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much, Lily.
Yes, indeed. Now, a US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath about the sexual assault allegations made against him by American woman Virginia Giuffre. The date of 14th of July 2020 means the questioning could clash with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, which will take place in June. The Duke of York has vehemently denied allegations he sexually assaulted Miss Giuffre when she was a teenager. She claims she was trafficked to the Prince by convicted sex offender and former friend of the Duke, Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, we are now joined by Richard Fitzwilliams, who's a royal commentator. Richard, thank you for your time. I tell you what, if this clashes with the Jubilee celebrations, it'll be an added misery, won't it, for the royal family?
Oh, there's no doubt that this case is a very considerable embarrassment. I mean, this is taking place under the mutual legal assistance, which means that it's investigation and prosecution of cases in different countries. This is an agreement that is supposedly to assist this. Now, the schedule has been agreed, apparently, by Andrews and Virginia Roberts-Giuffre's legal team, so he responds by the end of this month, the 29th of October. She could make amendments to the charges into December. As you say, this is likely to be something that will indeed be very, very embarrassing. He strongly denied this, and what I think his lawyers are certainly investigating, and that is a 2009 settlement agreement between Virginia Roberts-Giuffre and the deceased paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. To what extent that may work in Andrew's favour, we don't know as yet. It certainly appeared to work in the favour of the noted United States lawyer Alan Dershowitz. And Dershowitz gave us his opinion that if Andrew's solicitors saw this, it would work in his favour. As I say, we simply don't know. He obviously believes that if he could break down her evidence against him, and that means being more proactive, it means actually answering questions. If he didn't, he might choose to remain silent, or indeed it's conceivable that he might say that he hadn't anything relevant to add. But if there was a default judgment against him, that would be very serious, obviously, at least so far as his reputation is concerned. And if there was some form of settlement between them, that would appear to be an admission of guilt. It is a very, very complex issue. It also, unfortunately for Andrew, isn't the only issue.
Yes. Well, no, not at all, not at all. Richard, thank you very much for your insightful comments there. I'm sorry to leave it there. We are just a bit pressed for time, but I think you've successfully whizzed us through pretty much all of the major issues. Richard Fitzwilliams, our royal commentator, discussing the very latest with Prince Andrew, which, in case you are just joining us, is that a US judge has set a deadline for Prince Andrew to answer questions under oath about the sexual assault allegations, which, of course, he vehemently denies. Now, I think we should finish the show by giving the people the final word.
I think so.
I think so. So I'll delve into my inbox again, and a lot of you have been getting in touch about a load of different issues, actually. It's been fantastically well emailed into show, so thank you very much. And this is about the mental health issue that we spoke about earlier. We came into possession, essentially, of some figures pretty damning, really, when it came to the effect of mental health in recent months on children and on students and young people. It would help if the government stopped trying to frighten everyone with scare stories about COVID and the climate, and that's from Lawrence. I mean, it's a terrifying time, isn't it? If you sit there, you can believe that we're all going to fry to death within a few years' time, or that, you know, there's going to be a new variant. There has been a lot of fear pumped into people's lives, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate, actually, because the spontaneity of life has just been taken out. Things just feel dreary. There seems like you have to always be thinking about the virus, or always be thinking about this, that and the other. And I miss the old days.
Yes, before
2019.
Before the fear. Phil's been in touch. This is about whether or not nurses and indeed NHS staff as a whole should get vaccinated. No jab, no job. He says, how would you feel if a nurse did not wash their hands? No jab has the same effect in bringing in the germs, and that's Phil's views. Thank you so much to everyone who's been getting in touch with us today and who's been a part of this show. It's been great to have you all on board. Mercy Now will be back again at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. But up next, it's The Briefing with Gloria De Piero.
Hello there. Autumn is very much with us across the UK. Often quite cloudy out there through the day today. Some wet weather to come across Scotland, but very mild for this time of year. Now that's all down to our air coming up from the southwest. You can see these warm yellows and oranges produced across the map means that it is going to be a pretty mild picture. We have got weather fronts up towards Scotland bringing some rain and some fairly tightly packed isobars which bring a strong wind as well. Let's take a look at the picture across Scotland. We've already had some quite heavy rain pushing its way through during this morning. A brief lull in that rain, but then it turns heavier and more persistent for the Western Isles and Western Highland later on in the day. Strong and gusty winds, gusts of 50 miles an hour here. Elsewhere, quite a lot of cloud across the country. A few bright or sunny breaks, but very mild for this time of year. Highs of 17 degrees Celsius. Through this evening then, that rain starts to edge its way a little bit further east and southwards, getting into Northern Ireland through the evening, and then later in the night getting through into Northern England as well. To the south of it, it stays very mild. We'll have a few bits and pieces of drizzle across Western Hills. These are the temperatures we should be seeing by daytime in October, not the overnight temperatures with a keen breeze. As we go through Wednesday morning then, we've got this rain pushing its way in and persisting through much of the day. You can see it really doesn't move very quickly. So we have a rain warning in force. There is the risk of some flooding through Cumbria, southwest Scotland, some difficult travelling conditions as well. 1 or 2 showers to the west of Scotland. To the south of that rain band, another very mild day. Highs of 18 degrees Celsius. That's 64 in Fahrenheit with a keen southwesterly breeze. As we go through Wednesday evening, then we'll continue to see this rain just trickling a little bit further southwards into northwest Wales. It stays on the mild side, a few clear spells as we go into the overnight period. And then it turns more unsettled more widely across the country through Thursday and Friday. Strong winds, the risk of some heavy rain. And as we head into the weekend, temperatures sliding away. I'll see you later.